When we go through some type of major life change or event, there are really two responses that happen out of that circumstance. The first response is we lose some type of label. We were married, we're now no longer married. Consequently, we were a husband or a wife, and we're no longer that label. For some people, when they go through the major life event like that, it's a superficial element that has changed, but it doesn't change who you fundamentally are. Yes, it's extremely often dispiriting and discouraging and disheartening when you lose a label like the loss of a marriage or the loss of a job or the loss of a friendship. The loss of a label is something superficial. But for some of us, when we go through a major life change, we lose our identity. We no longer know who we are. In fact, we sometimes question if we ever really knew who we were at the center of our being, in our essence, at the core. That is something very different than losing a label. That is a deep foundational shift that has occurred and revealed that you don't know who you are. You don't know who you really are at the core. So a loss of a label has some specific elements that come with it. It can be a financial or a practical setback. You can have fear of change and uncertainty. You can have lack of support from the community that you once had. I know a lot of people in the military go through this. They exit the military and they leave that brotherhood and sisterhood. And now that whole community fabric is gone. And they exit into the civilian world and they really struggle with that. You can also have an attachment to the past. You really liked being married to this person, or you really liked having that job. And you can have a sense of overwhelm and a lack of direction. Those are all very understandable pain points when you lose a label. When you lose a sense of identity, this is what it looks like. You have trouble getting over hurts and trauma. You have trouble adjusting to a new reality. You're overcome by guilt and shame. You can't identify who you are. You are identified rather with this embedded trauma, whatever it is that you've said about yourself over time. Your embedded trauma ends up being your identity. Whether you felt like you weren't worthy or you felt like you were broken, that is now what you're identifying with. You can have difficulty establishing your own independence and your own priorities. You have trouble committing to who you want to become and who you were intended to be in life. You have trouble developing new beliefs. So you're really running a racket of all the past beliefs that you had, and whatever you decided about yourself at 7 years old, you still think that about yourself now. So you have trouble developing new beliefs. Consequently, you have trouble adopting new behaviors. You have trouble learning how to respond differently to triggers and challenges. You battle doubt and imposter syndrome, and you struggle with how long it takes you to get from where you are to where you want to be. A person who knows who they are at the core, who stands on a firm foundation, and who has a future full of hope. If any of those pain points sound like you, stick around. Traumatic experiences that do not impact a person's belief about themselves and their ability to cope does not come from a schism in identity. That's really what we're talking about here. Trauma that leads to a schism in identity often forms very early on. The thesaurus antithesis of identity is anonymity. So one is known and one is not known. And the synonym to anonymity is namelessness. Namelessness. It was so interesting because for me, when I started this journey and I needed to find who I was at the core, I had walked out of a relationship that was 7 years long. It was very unusual, the relationship, because I had traumatic brain injury, and that traumatic brain injury rendered me home and often bedbound. So this person that I was with was often the only person I saw or interacted with in any given day, week, month. And so I was 100% focused on this person. And I was kind of like the girl under the stairs, you know? My sun rose and set when this person walked in the door. I walked out of that relationship 3 months before we were supposed to get married. And I remember when I did, I went to my parents' condo and I went into my parents' bedroom and I took out a nightshirt for my dad because when I left the house, I just left. I just walked out of the front door, never to return to that relationship. And when I did, and I jumped in the shower, I didn't have anything, right? I just had the clothes that I had walked out with. So I went into my parents' bedroom and I pulled a big white t-shirt. My dad is a tall person. And so I pulled this big white V-neck t-shirt out of his drawer and I put it on myself and I had my hair pulled back in a tight ponytail like I do right now. And I sat down in front of the mirror in the guest bedroom. The closets were mirrored. And so I sat down in this big white t-shirt with my hair all pulled back in front of this mirrored door. And I just looked blank. I was looking in the mirror at myself, but as I was looking at myself, looking deeply at myself, nothing looked back. I was completely blank. That's when I knew that I didn't know who I was at the core. And consequently, not knowing who I was at the core, I remembered all the times I felt I had no connection to my name. So my name is Cordelia Yoakum. It's difficult to say. It's very unusual. It's not phonetic. And over time, this Cordelia Yoakum felt like it was a person outside of me that I could look at almost from a distance. Like, oh yeah, there's Cordelia. I didn't think much about her. I didn't understand much about her. I was just looking at Cordelia Yoakum from outside of myself at a distance. And I remember when I lived in Los Angeles, I worked at this fashion company, and a lot of the executives had their names stenciled on their parking bumper, that cement bumper that stops your car from rolling. At this particular company, and over my lifetime, people have struggled saying my name. The person who was the president of this company, he really struggled with saying my name, and he just decided he was going to create another name for me. And so he said, I can't ever say your name. I can't figure it out. I'm just going to call you something different. What should I call you? And I said, and I don't know where this came from, but I said, you can call me Jack. And he said, Jack what? And I said, just Jack. And so from that moment forward, my name for this particular president of this company was not just Jack or Jack. He called me JJ. Not only did he call me JJ, but the rest of the company began calling me JJ. And when I got my parking bumper stenciled on my bumper and assigned to me, Cordelia Yoakum, was JJ. And when I told the story to the man that I was dating at the time, I was laughing. Like, oh, this is so funny. And now my parking bumper says JJ. And he looked at me and in all seriousness, he said, that's a real problem. That's a real problem. And I didn't know what he meant. When you look at your name as a label, how you're recognized is by your name. It comes from family and heritage. If your name is indeed Jack, you're named after your Uncle Jack or your father's father. So it reflects this desire to honor your ancestors or your lineage. And oftentimes there's symbolism and meaning in it. When I began my journey, I went down to a place in San Francisco. I just was driving around this neighborhood that I was in, and I happened upon this little tiny gallery. And when I went in, I noticed right away that something was very different about this gallery. The paintings all had a sense of childlikeness about them. And so I began having a conversation with the woman who was behind the counter. And as I was standing there talking to this woman, my eye caught a door on the side and I saw all these people sitting at tables. And she said, "Would you like to go back there?" And what she was explaining to me is Creativity Explored is art therapy for adults who have disabilities, often mental disabilities. When I went back, there was a gentleman that came rushing up to me and started talking to me and sharing about his art and all the things that he was painting. And he was telling me about this one painting that he had done and showed it to me. And it was a big red dinosaur. And I said, "Oh, this is amazing. I love this dinosaur. What is its name?" And he looked at me very seriously and he said, "Dinosaur. Dinosaur." And I said, "Oh, that is so cool." And he said, "What is your name?" And because I have such a disassociation from my name, and I know it's so difficult for people to say, I've often gone by the short version of my name, which is Core. And that's what I told him. My name is Core. And he jumped back. He flew back from me in like this surprise. And then he rushed right up into my face and he said, "That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Your name is Core. You're from the core. That's so cool." And I was so taken aback because he said, "I've never met someone from Middle Earth before." That's what the name Core meant to him. And what he didn't know and what he could not know is that that's how I felt. That I was in the middle of this transformation. I had descended from this state of blankness where I didn't know anything, and I began walking the journey to understand who I was at the core. And as I descended into Middle Earth, into this area that was hot and molten and forming and liquid. That's who I was. I was Core, a woman from Middle Earth who was forming and transforming at the core of her being. I had a friend named Shelley who came over one time as I was beginning this journey. And she said to me this thing: "Your name is Cordelia and everyone calls you Core. You have to get right with that. People want the core essence, the core energy, the core presence. You have to do a better job respecting where God positions you and the gifts that he gave you. Have reverence for what he gave you. Use it. Double it." Although I had no real relationship with any God that Shelley was talking about, what I understood in that moment is I didn't only not understand my name, I didn't understand what was in a name. There is another layer of naming that is rooted in a biblical intelligence that says your name describes your identity and your character. Your name identifies your divine purpose. A name signifies a covenant and a blessing. A name carries prophetic significance. And there is something even more beautiful about a name. If you are experiencing a distance from your name, a lack of rootedness in it because you don't know who you are at the core, there is this beautiful verse in Isaiah 43:1, and it says, "But now this is what the Lord says, He who is your creator, Jacob, and he who has formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine." And that is the truth about going on a journey to the core of who you are. You will not ever know who you actually are. You will not know and understand yourself until you know and understand God. Because the journey of self-awareness intersects with spirituality. Those two go together. But for right now, no matter where you are in the journey, with God or without, you need to know your name. What is your name? What is the meaning of your name? What does the meaning of your name mean to you? What is the source of your name? Where did it come from? What does the source, or being named after someone or being named for something, what does that mean to you? What are the nicknames you've been given? I'm sure you have a JJ in you as well. What are the nicknames you've given yourself? And what is the name you prefer to be called? If you would answer those below, that would be great. So in the last part, we talk about something that is foundational if you're going through this journey and you don't know who you are at the core, and that is a schism in identity. A schism is a split or division between strongly opposed sections and parties caused by differences in opinion or belief. It's a cleft or split. There was a moment in time where, if you are feeling like you don't know who you are at the core, your identity split. And who you actually are stood on a separate bank from the belief about who you told yourself you were. And in between, a cleft formed, a split occurred. And that is called a schism. So if you are waking up today and you're feeling blank, and you don't know who you are, and you have no association to your name, or you have a negative association to your name, you have a split at the core of who you are. You have a schism. And that is what we're going to talk about next up. So the next video we're going to cover when a person experiences a profound and often painful disconnect between different aspects of themselves, it creates an internal divide. And it often forms when trauma enters. So unfortunately, we're going to have to go to that first traumatic incident in your life. You may not be aware of what it was. You may know what it is, but you don't want to talk about it. You may have suppressed it, but there is no way to heal and seal up that trauma without actually looking at it. Trauma is fundamentally a loss. It causes you to lose that sense of who you are. But that loss is a loss of innocence, a loss of a sense of safety, and a loss of alignment with your true self. It is not an option, however, for you to not know who you are at the core of your being. So if you have that wounding, if you have that schism, come with me on the journey. This is a journey of a lifetime. And the stages of transformation are reckoning, healing, transformation, and hope. You will end on hope. That much, I promise you. I'll see you next time.